Karem of the Yellow Hills has murdered Ruthie's father in cold blood. She's out for justice and revenge, but she'll need help. Ruthie and Supergirl, who's dealing with her own trauma, will join forces to hunt down Karem on a trail that will lead them across a galaxy to the final showdown. It's basically True Grit in space. Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics. Welcome to Truth, Beauty, Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, the guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. And we were planning on doing some more Hellboy this week, but this new Supergirl movie is coming out fairly soon, I think, if it's not already out.
I think next week, yeah.
Yeah, so probably by the time this airs, it'll be out. And it's based, believe it or not, on a comic series. So Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. So I think we called an audible and decided to maybe read this one. This had been kind of kicking around, at least in the back of my head for a while, as something I wanted to talk about. Yeah, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King, illustrated by Bilquis Evely. I think I'm saying that right. And Matthias Lopez or Lopes. Yeah, and you've just finished reading this, Felix, about 20 minutes ago. So yeah. I've had a couple years to digest this one. You've had about 40 minutes or so. So
yeah,
gosh, where to start, huh?
Yeah, and I think it's a series that I think it's a miniseries. I think we could sort of dig into a lot of different parts of. I think we'll try to be kind of big picture for a bit, and we'll hold off on talking about the ending for a little while. So we'll kind of let people who don't want to be spoiled, depending on how the movie goes, who don't want to be spoiled, can wait a little bit. Can listen to the first half hour or something, and then we'll let you know when we're getting close to the end. So in a way, the ending is very key to this series, and so I can't kind of give really clear, full thoughts on it.
I will say, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, like, I have some criticisms throughout. So, but if we're just talking about the first 7 issues and setting aside the last issue, I have some criticisms, particularly sort of certain aspects of the kind of attempted antiquated writing style. I think sometimes
yes.
kind of takes me out of it a little bit. But if I kind of set that aside, and kind of not, and set aside the art, and I'm mostly just thinking about the actual storytelling and the characters, it is really compelling, and I like a lot of what goes on in the first 7 issues.
Yeah. So what drew me to this one, I'd say to start with, and this is I think something that is very positive about these comics, was Bilquis Evely's art. So I think that's what made me. I saw these just kind of floating around. I think maybe on Instagram or the internet. These drawings of hers, particularly like, Supergirl riding a horse, or some of the kind of the more space opera kind of looking stuff. It's like, that looks really cool. Whatever's going on in this comic, this looks like a load of fun. And then you kind of read the pitch, and I'd say this seems to be kind of something that's just almost, you can almost hear the pitch meeting, right, for this one, like True Grit in space, Supergirl and this kind of Baroque, almost,
very rustic and
rustic,
sort of uneducated,
chivalrous, kind of young girl team up to go chase down, hunt down the man who killed her father. I mean, this is something that's like almost made to be made into a movie. It's something that you can really clearly latch onto. So it sounded to me like, man, this sounds like a load of fun. It looks awesome. It looks really fun. And so I kind of ran out and got it. And I'd say as I read it, my enthusiasm waned throughout the story. Particularly because of the writing, I think that the plot holds together pretty well, but the writing really started to grate on me, and then the ending kind of made me lose all taste for it. So it's one of those weird things where it's like, on the whole, this is probably much better than most comics DC puts out, I'd say, art wise and even kind of storytelling wise in many ways. But the fact that I think it seems to have very grand ambitions, and to me that's where it started to it's one of those comics that wants to say something important, it feels like. And to me, the more I started to go down this road, I started to get more and more annoyed with it, to the point where I'm like, it's kind of one of the least favorite things I've read in a while, because it should have been better. But I guess that'd be my kind of my high level my high level take more on this. But
Now,
yeah.
we've mentioned a couple times the sort of writing. So the story is narrated by this girl Ruthie. Now she's sort of
Mm-hmm.
looking back, and a bit more is revealed in the last issue about that, but we won't talk about that yet. But she's sort of looking back as an older woman at her experience with Supergirl as a young woman after her father was murdered. And the style is kind of it's attempting to sort of do two things. One is to be sort of formal and old timey,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is to be sort of rustic. And to me, it basically fails at both of those. Even though, like, if I can distinguish between the sort of stylistic stuff of Ruthie's voice and kind of Ruthie's voice on its own and what's being said, the latter I think works really well. I think Ruthie is a character that pulled me in. And so as long as I could look past the sort of not very felicitously worded, sorry, I'm not wording things very well, but not very felicitously worded kind of caption boxes, I actually sort of liked her voice, but and some of them are fine, right? So like I'm looking at the first page. My father, whose name I will not record here, for I do not wish it learned, did not die a dignified or honorable death. Okay, fine. That's a little bit sort of higher register,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, pretty soon we get. I'm just looking for a kind of particularly clunky one. There's the one where it sort of is giving the names of the meals that I thought was really. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. So a few pages in. Allow me then to continue on the more traditional path of storytelling to better illuminate our beginnings in order that you might understand our ends. I am blessed by crying Anne with 6 brothers, all of whom are elder to me. And that evening, at N's feast, they were all yelling mad at one another, each one with a plan of vengeance. And it's like, all of whom are elder to me is just not a comfortable thing to read. Right. And it's,
Yeah.
because I think part of it, it's not clear that Tom King is basing this off of any kind of particular period in older English speech.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It would be kind of cool if someone who knew a given period, right, whether it's had read a lot of, novels, English novels from the 1700s, or
Right.
had read a lot of Shakespeare, or, liked Chaucer or whatever, and was kind of aping a particular period and trying to make it
Sure.
alien. Right? Like that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
cool. And maybe he was trying to do this. I didn't get a sense that there was any particular kind of time period. I think and because of that, it like just often felt kind of grammatically tortured
Yeah.
and and it was more sort of alienating as I was reading it. And I mean, and it's one thing to kind of intentionally alienate readers with a style to kind of to challenge them in some way, right? To kind of force them to work through that. But I just don't think he did super well with that. And so
Right.
there would be various times when I was enjoying the story, even enjoying the sort of kind of point the kind of character
Right.
aspects that were coming through in the narration, but the actual writing style of the caption boxes and I quite a few times on this podcast have vehemently defended the caption box and the narrative box. I love it when somebody's talking to me and it's not just speech between characters. I love it when there's Stan Lee's voice, whatever. I love it. I'm all about it. But just the way that it was written for me really kind of made certain points of the story harder for me to really enter into.
Yeah, I'll go a little further, I think, and say I think Tom King's writing, particularly, and it may be, Felix, that this is the comic that made me hate caption boxes too. If I'm thinking back into the history here,
To be
that made me
fair,
kind of decide that I don't, I want to avoid them as much as possible. But I think his writing actually makes this kind of a slog. And I'll give an example. So again, we're in the first pages, and it's when she's swimming to follow Supergirl. So we have 3 panels here, and fairly simple panels where Supergirl's running away in a boat, and Ruthie has this choice of like, do I just let her go, or am I going to chase her down and try to get her to, to help me, right? So kind of a normal thing. So she makes the choice. She dives in, which is a great place. He says, "Had I let her go, I'm not going to let her go." She basically says. We have a little inner monologue. That's fine. Then we have 3 panels of her swimming, and over that it says, "As I went, I could feel the jaw dones nipping at my skin, testing and tasting. Fortunately, they are a fearful lot this close to shore, and my motion in the swim was enough to convince them to hold off a swarm. Tuckered out, I'd be an easier meal, which was all the motivation I needed to keep my arms and legs pumping." Panel 2. The most cumbersome obstacle was Karem's sword hanging heavy from my belt, dragging against the sea as I pushed forward. I was tempted on a number of occasions to release the weapon and allow it to descend peacefully into the deep blue, but I managed to remind myself each time that it held my father's last blood and the seafloor was not its capping destination. Panel 3. Eventually and thankfully, I reached the shore. The burn and scratch of the sand on my feet felt like a baptism, and I welcome it as a babe welcomes the smile of a kindly priest. So, kind of a funky metaphor to end it. Like, I read that, you go, wait a second, the sand feels like a baptism. You're getting out of the water, but the sand is the baptism that's happening. And just this kind of like, I welcome it as a babe welcomes the smile of a kindly priest. Like, okay, it's this kind of a little bit of a weird mixed metaphor. And this is like so much narration for something that you should just be visually able to understand what's going on. So it's not very well written. It's not really adding much. It's just this perpetual inner monologue that like turns on as soon as action starts happening. So the characters are either talking or there's this monologue over everything. And I think it really particularly slows down the action scenes, right? So I think, it's like Tom King is trying to write like this novel, and it's almost like he wants to write a novel here. And I can't imagine like if I was the illustrator being handed this thing and saying like, hey, fit this into like, a single issue. Like, this is a lot of text to cram in. And so it just ends up just being like walls of text over like, these images that don't really add much, and they make it a real chore to get through. I mean, I just found myself skimming so much of this on the reread just recently. Yeah.
And I think there are some that work for me. So, right. So kind of to give a little bit more of the summary, right? So this Karem of the Yellow Hills, this guy who's a king's agent who sort of makes sure that people are loyal to the king, comes to Ruthie's rock farm, whatever that is, and stays with them for a day. And when talking with her father out in the field, kills him. And Ruthie, wants revenge, knows who killed her father, but is not capable of exacting a revenge herself. So she takes this very valuable sword and tries to hire a bounty hunter, basically, or a guy to kill Karem for her. The guy says, "Oh yeah, I'll do it," and he takes the sword, and she says, "No, I'll give it to you as payment after you actually kill him and show me the proof." And then he tries to sort of steal it, and it's unclear, like, would he really have tried to kill Karem after? Who knows? But Supergirl happens to be on this strange planet in this one bar, stops the guy, and befriends Ruthie. And then eventually Ruthie is able to convince Supergirl to kind of help her with the mission of exacting revenge on Karem. But Karem ends up taking Supergirl's spaceship. And you sort of get the sense that there isn't really any space travel on this kind of primitive planet. And so he is sort of this bloodthirsty, horrid person who gets to go out to space and I guess over the course of it, thousands of people, really.
Yeah.
And Ruthie and Supergirl are kind of chasing him across the cosmos, going from sort of planet to planet, which gives you this sort of the sort of what to me was the strongest part of the book, kind of going to these different planets, and something is wrong, something is off, and they have to sort of try to deal with it, sometimes very successfully, sometimes not super. And
I think the creativity and that's where I think there's a lot of strength here. especially in the art, right? So this Everly's art really reminds me a lot of kind of Alex Raymond, kind of Flash Gordon. It has these very in the coloring too, I think is very, a real fantastic job on the coloring on this one too. It's something where it's digital coloring, but it's doing it in a way that really works well with the inking. And they'll go to a lot of these very fantastic planets, and they're varied. They look unique. They look interesting. It's real sci-fi kind of, but in a Flash Gordon kind of style. Very bright and colorful. Not like it's not like an aliens kind of dark and gritty sort of universe that they're going through. So that part's pretty delightful, I think, just seeing the different settings and the the different locations that they get to visit, because there's so much kind of visual creativity happening as you go through this. One thing I guess, but before we move on from the writing, as I was reading this, I was thinking about our way back to our Understanding Comics episode, right? Kind of the Scott McCloud art of making comics. And there's one thing where he says he's talking about like kind of the art of comics. It's like words and pictures like partners in a dance, right? Each one takes the turn leading. He makes this metaphor where when both partners try to lead, the competition can subvert its overall goals. But when those partners each know their roles and support each other's strengths, it can match any art form. It's kind of what his take on that.
Yeah.
And that's where I felt like there was just with the writing in this book, there's so many parts where it felt like Tom King could not step back and just let the artwork speak for itself. There always had to be someone talking kind of, or there had to be like a wall of text going. And obviously sometimes, I'm not criticizing voiceover at all here, because that can be really effective sometimes. But, there's so many dramatic scenes that just have this, it's just like someone needs to shut up, so we can like kind of appreciate a little bit what's going on here. I mean, and you see this a lot with, I think a lot of, I think of Jeff Smith, kind of one of the most powerful issues he has ever drawn is like Eye of the Storm. And it's when you have a cartoonist who's doing the writing and the illustrating, they kind of have a natural sense of when to let the visuals speak for themselves, when to let the words speak for themselves.
Yeah. They're trying to use it.
Yeah.
Smith and Bone is so good at that kind of letting there be sort of silent scenes.
Yeah.
And he
or
does
Hergé is another one.
Too. Yeah. And like and it works great for comedy, but it also often, particularly if you're quite good at drawing emotive faces, it's really good for communicating characters' kind of emotional experiences.
Or even a totally other random example would be like something like Tide Kubo, right? We've done a lot of Bleach here, and he has a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of writing in his stuff that's very good. But usually, like when the action starts to pick up, it's a lot. It becomes much more kind of visceral. So if you pick up a Bleach kind of manga, I was looking through this before that, and you look at the action scenes. They're very, and we've talked how much how easy it is to kind of understand what's going on, even though it's really fast paced and you're just kind of like burning through this. And he just kind of lets the action really kind of speak for itself. And I think it just makes it a lot more enjoyable of a read when things start to move. And it seemed like there was a reluctance here to let that happen, which made me kind of grind through it a bit more.
The one I would sort of defend is I think it's issue 6, when we get the story of Krypton's fall as Supergirl is riding, this horse comet kind of across the galaxy. And then I didn't kind of know the DC world building well enough to know exactly how she kind of deals with the issue. But right, like it's, in a way, it would be a kind of boring scene, right? Because I mean, it's really cool images, but if it were just the whole issue of her on the back of the horse flying through space, it would not be that interesting. But the way that it's done with the text, I think, works really well, where you have these very dynamic images of Supergirl and Comet trying to get away from, I forget what it's called, but the kind of magical transportation thing.
Yeah.
and it alternates between those really well chosen sort of key images of her, passing by a sun, or going into kind of almost mystical looking space that, again, there's probably DC world building here I'm missing, but alternating that with images from the last days of Krypton, because Supergirl was, like Superman, born on Krypton, but unlike
Yeah.
Superman, she actually was sort of there as it was dying. And there's this striking sort of moment, for me at least, in the narration where Ruthie says Krypton did not die in a day. The gods are
Hmm.
not that kind. And it sort of goes through the last days of Krypton. And I thought that was really well done. I thought that was basically the best use of the kind of caption boxes,
Yeah.
was that issue, because I think it gave, because at this point you've spent several issues with Supergirl and kind of gotten to know her a bit, and then you, or at least for me, I'm not someone who's really read that much DC, and I've read literally no
Yeah.
Supergirl before this ever. Uh, so it did kind of, by that point I had a little bit of a sense of her character, and it helped sort of me to understand her background. And it also is sort of, I I have the sense, kind of interpretively, for the book as a whole, an important one, because it's right. The book is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and this is where the idea of Woman of Tomorrow comes from.
Yeah.
And it's, at least for me, it was very surprising, because it was not. I kind of think of the sort of Woman of Tomorrow thing as being a sort of sci-fi thing, almost, right?
Hmm.
Of like, she's so strong and able to do all these things that like we can't do, but maybe in the future we'd be able to, right? And that's not what they're going for here. Instead, the idea is her mother has died, her planet is dying, her father, with sort of the last of his strength, builds a small pod that will be able to escape, and she'll be able to live, and to sort of live to see tomorrow,
Hmm.
after the death of her father. And right, and I mean that, like, I think that's a really beautiful scene. I was
Yeah.
quite moved by that. And there is, right, interestingly, for a book where we don't actually really spend much of any time with the fathers because they're both killed, fatherhood is a very important kind of theme in this work.
Yeah.
And Supergirl's, I mean, both Supergirl's father and Ruthie's father come off as very good men, in a kind of pretty like straightforward way, right? I mean, this is a book that has some kind of moral ambiguity, and what I took to be not entirely, let's say, valuable or well morally thought out kind of attempted interrogation, that we'll kind of get into at the end.
Yeah.
But despite that, they're both very honorable fathers.
Yeah.
And
At least they're perceived that way by their daughters.
yeah,
Yeah.
certainly anything we see in here. Again, there's
Yeah.
probably other comics
Yeah.
that depict Supergirl's father very differently. I don't know. And both of our protagonists, Ruthie and Supergirl, have this, carry the weight of their father's deaths. Um,
Yeah.
and that's really motivating for them in different ways, right? So Ruthie is motivated to seek vengeance, basically. Supergirl, and I mean, Superman is also an important kind of part of this story. He's not present in it at all, but he's referenced as being, in a certain way, kind of inspiring to Supergirl. Now you get the sense, right, that Supergirl, right, Superman is truth, justice, in the American way, and at least as I think of the most compelling depictions of his character, he's not that conflicted about it. Like,
Right.
it's a very natural thing, right? Like, Peter Parker has to constantly remind himself, like, no, this is my responsibility. I need to do this, right?
Yeah.
Superman, I feel like there's a lot more just like, well, I'm able to do this, so I better help people.
Right.
It just kind of
Yeah.
happens. And I
Yep.
think Supergirl, my sense is, at least in King's portrayal, much more like a Peter Parker, where she's in a lot of pain and is kind of having to sort of not so much force herself, but try to, like, learn to be good. And in these earlier chapters, uh, I was I was continually sort of reminded of this great sort of speech from an episode of Doctor Who called Listen. It's one of my absolute favorites, but we don't kind of need to get into the plot of it. But there's a scene where a character, Clara, is telling this frightened child about sort of how to deal with fear, basically, and saying that fear is like this sort of constant companion, but it's okay because fear can bring us together. And it says, and if you're, I think if you're very, it's something like if you're very brave and very clever, fear doesn't have to make you cruel or cowardly. It can make you kind. And in the sort of early issues of this, when it would depict Supergirl, I kept sort of having this sort of line in my mind, because it seems like she strikes me as a character in a lot more pain than Superman in most depictions. Right?
Yeah.
She was there for the death of Krypton. She knew and loved these people. She wasn't a baby, right? She was a young woman. She saw all these people dying and dug graves for them and worked extremely hard in excruciating conditions to try to keep people alive and failed. But in these early issues,
Yeah.
she's
I think
depicted
I
as
think
still kind of forcing herself to try to still be kind. And there's like that really striking scene when she teaches Ruthie about washing her hands, in these sort of little moments. But yeah, you want to push back
yeah.
maybe?
Well, no, I don't actually. I think I agree with you, and that was the thing that really jumped out at me when on a rereading of this. It's like this is really a story. This came out in 2021. Feels very 2021, I'd say. It's very much a story, I think, about processing trauma, at its
Yeah.
core. I mean, because you could almost say that both the characters have kind of PTSD. Supergirl, particularly, that they're dealing with. I mean, when we meet her, she's drunk. She does drugs at some point, briefly in the story.
Well, to be fair, it's like a kryptonite
It's
drug. So it's
it's
sort
a
of,
kryptonite pill. It's a superhero, but I think that's kind of what
but
we're
yes.
leaning towards
Yeah,
here.
yeah. No, I mean there's a reason it's a little pill, yeah.
Yeah, she has. She often will have kind of 1,000-yard stare going, depicted, as someone who like just has a lot of inner pain. And, a lot of her actions are someone who's been, kind of PTSD, which is very pop, and I'm not criticizing, the common usage of terms like PTSD today, or how much people think about trauma more than they used to, or use those kind of psychological, self-diagnosis, that sort of stuff. But that's why I say it feels to me very 2021. It's kind of the peak of a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of, I think, gender dynamics kind of ham-fistedly inserted at points too, that also feel particularly of that time. Not in an offensive way necessarily, but there's a lot of hurt women in here, noticeably so. Uh, Kind of everyone who's been victimized is a woman. And then at the end, Ruthie gives this speech of everywhere girls will be born with their eyes open to the hate ahead of them. Then they'll wonder if their voice will be heard above the screams. In that moment, when help is begged from the heavens, there is a woman waiting, right? Which kind of struck me as like, it's odd to make it so gendered in this, because it's not like, it feels a little bit that Tom King is trying to make a point about how women are also treated, along with just general suffering. So there's some of that. I think however you feel about the point he's making, and the fact that he chose to kind of portray these characters as people suffering from PTSD, and honestly, rightfully so. There's some like really horrific stuff in this series. To me, it feels, and this is what kind of made me mad about, not mad, but frustrated me. It feels really incongruous with how this is pitched. If you look at the cover of this looks like a fun story, right? It has Supergirl with the sword. It looks like Flash Gordon, to me at least. That's what got
Yeah.
me into it, right? All the it's very bright, it's colorful. The story itself is a lot more grim, I would say, and not fun than it is a story about PTSD in many ways, and people trying to overcome that and find meaning beyond that. But for a story with space pirates and swords and kind of sword and sorcery and space opera stuff, there's not a lot of fun going on. It's pretty like harrowing. And so to me, I don't know. It felt that was something that I kind of expected something very different going into it. I expected more of a good time, which that's fine. It's just a little bit incongruous with how it's drawn and kind of the setting they put it in.
Do we want to? I feel like we're sort of pushing against the ending. Do we want to move into spoilers?
Sure. Yeah. So spoilers probably for those of you who haven't read it. We don't know. We haven't seen the Supergirl movie. It may have a totally different ending. It probably will, I would guess. But
I sort of hope it does. I feel like I might like it better if it does.
Yeah. But probably spoiler up until the end of this. So if you want to go into it unspoiled,
so
yeah.
So we kind of indicated, right, that you find out a bit more about Ruthie's narration at the end. In the last issue, it becomes clear that Ruthie's narration is taken from a book that she wrote much later. And it turns out sort of the book is not actually faithful to what happened, right? So the book says Supergirl killed Karem, basically. What actually happens until the last page is really moving and effective, and I really like it.
Yes, right? Real Ruthie, last page fumble.
Yeah. So Ruthie is going to kill Karem after a fight, and Supergirl is not there. She's like cut off Krem's fingers, beat him up, like she's gonna win. He's there waiting to be killed.
He's at her mercy. Yeah.
Yeah. And she keeps trying to, and she begins the swing, and then she just keeps pulling her hand away and hitting the water on the beach or going into the sky, and she just says, what's wrong with me? Why can't I kill you? And Supergirl comes down. She says, I don't know, maybe you just need a little help. And Supergirl goes to kill him and says, and also sort of reveals that there's been this kind of lie in the background that Supergirl is going with her in order to save Krypto's life, to figure out the nature of the poison, yada, yada, yada. Turns out Krypto's fine. I just made up all that stuff about needing to find Karem to save him, needing you to come with me because you knew what Karem looked like. You don't think I could have solved those problems? Come on, I'm Supergirl. And she says, I don't understand. Supergirl says, because you wouldn't listen to me. I could tell you were stubborn. I know stubborn well enough. You weren't going to learn that killing is wrong just by me saying it. You're going to waste the rest of your life chasing this, that sort of the classic comic book sort of garbled signs to mean swearing, which there's a bunch of that sort of throughout the comic, and is occasionally funny. Dreaming about this worthless, I'll say, stuff like I would dream about Krypton. I had to show you. I took you with me, hoping you'd learn about, I don't know, something. But you didn't learn, did you? Which makes all the sense in the world, because I couldn't teach you. Because I still dream of Krypton. And, right, so we learn, okay, Supergirl had the intention of bringing Ruthie to help Ruthie understand basically the emptiness of vengeance, pointlessness of this kind of violence, of sort of allowing violence to beget violence. But in a way, they sort of both moved in opposite directions, right? Now Supergirl is about to kill him. And we have caption box, and there was the rub of it. She'd done all this to teach me good from bad, and in the process, she'd seen enough to lose track herself. The months of witnessing the cruelty of all things had worn her down to her true self, to the girl in the rocket fleeing into the sky. And she's about to kill him, and Ruthie says, I learned it. Supergirl, do you hear me? You better damn hear me. I learned it. And then she sort of describes all these moments throughout their journey together when Ruthie kind of saw in Supergirl this deep wells of kindness, basically, and bravery. And it's really striking, right? But then it also sort of has that, okay, in the book that she wrote, Supergirl kills him. Ruthie says, eventually says, enough killing's been done. And she's convinced. And then we move way, way into the future. And it turns out they've left Karem alive. Karem has been living in, what's it called? Is it the Phantom Zone?
Phantom Zone, yeah.
Yeah. So he's been there for 3 centuries. First century, he was just spiteful and hateful. Second century, he started to come to kind of care for his thousands of victims. And in the third century, the last 100 years, Supergirl says, he's been ideal, working hard at making up for what he'd done. Like he had a different heart, like he was a different man, a better man. And then they release him from the Phantom Zone, and he ends up thanking Supergirl for having forced him to deal with this, right? And then he says, "You, Ruth Mary Knoll, I've thought about nothing but you and I'm so, so sorry. Please forgive me. I beg you, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." And it's really beautiful, striking. And then the final page, everyone is in
silhouette, yeah.
Shadow, right? Is in silhouette. Just as in the first page, you just have the silhouette of Karem killing Ruthie's father. You now have the silhouette of Ruthie killing this old, decrepit Karem after he has learned his lesson and repented and asked for forgiveness. And in the caption, she says, "It's too big," she said. "We're too small. I knew they were my words, said long ago at the edge of Maypole, and I could not fathom their meaning coming now from her lips. For surely she must see that nothing was outside of her reach." She did not further elaborate, and I did not ask her. And sort of the silhouettes, they leave Karem there, right? And it seems like he's dying there on the ground. And Ruthie walks away, and Supergirl walks away. She did not further elaborate, and I did not ask her. Instead, she moved her sword swiftly through the air and stabbed down through the chest of the kneeling brigand, right? So this is the text of her novel again. And after it was done, she returned the bloody blade to my hand. And that is where I shall end this long story of Ruthie, Supergirl, and Karem of the Yellow Hills. And so there's a lot sort of going on here that I think needs to be pulled apart, right? So there's the two different stories, right? There's the story that Ruthie has told, right? And then the story as it actually happened. And then there's also kind of their motivations here.
Yeah. There's
what do you think?
My immediate reaction reading this for the first time was, UTF. Like, like you're going along, you feel like things are moving in a specific direction. That, I would have probably forgiven quite a bit of the story had there been, kind of the ending that everything is pointing towards here, I think. And this ending made me really mad. And I thought it was really confusing. First off, it's unclear what the point that's being made here is. It felt really kind of amateur, like something you would write in like your high school creative writing class to be edgy, to give like an edgy twist or something like that. That was not earned, was not like even like part of the story, and it was just confusing and like a weird like non sequitur that. I don't know. There was so much that I didn't like about it. It just kind of made me hate the rest of what came before even more. So,
yeah, and
what do you think the point he's making is? What happens here?
That's part of the difficulty, right? Because I probably would have, if it had been done certain ways, I probably would have liked it even if on the beach Supergirl had killed him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was deeply evil, guilty of genocide against dozens of worlds, like awful, right? If you want to let a superhero kill somebody, he's the kind of person you want to let him just sort of kill and move on. So I get that. I would even understand if it had just been sort of like torture for a very long time and then eventually kill them. I wouldn't have done that personally, but I can understand it, right? But it seems, and it's also crucially, I think, right, people, I don't want to be guilty of the kind of like, high school junior who reads Catcher in the Rye and says like, oh, Holden Caulfield is just kind of a brat. Why would we read about him? He's terrible, right? Like flawed characters can be quite interesting and valuable, right? So I don't know that Tom King necessarily wants us to like Ruthie at the ending, right? But it's very unclear. I certainly don't, right?
Yeah.
Like to me, to give it kind of the most positive reading, there are times when right when someone has done something awful and then ultimately genuinely repented
Mm-hmm.
and is not forgiven, right? And the sort of evil ends up festering in the person who's hurt rather than the one who hurts. And it seems like that's what happened here, right? But like it's a very kind of depressing story to think like
Right.
Ruthie at this point, decades down the line, after he's been, I mean, I don't know that much about the Phantom Zone, but it doesn't sound like a nice place. Seemingly punished for a very long time and grown, that she's still incapable of forgiving him. And at this point, right, it's sort of killing in cold blood much more than it is actual,
Yeah.
like, immediate revenge. And like she's sort of been twisted in this way.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And I think the thing that frustrated me about this is, I mean, there's a lot that frustrated me, but particularly how this kind of is delivered, that I feel like there's something, it's a very weird way to just end your story, no matter what point you're trying to make. Because there's this moment of crisis right on the beach where Ruthie seems to learn this lesson, and that would be the place to kill him if you want to. It seems like everything's leading up to this point. We have this big decision, this big speech where she makes a choice and prevents Supergirl from doing something like that. But you could have easily had that go a different way. If you wanted the ending of that story to be that Karem, Ruthie kills Karem, there's a great opportunity to do that. It's the setting for it. That would be the place to have that kind of put out. To do it in this way of, hey, we're going to kind of tack on this epilogue that kind of contradicts the last scene that we had, right? And we're going to also introduce this unreliable narrator into it, this device that we didn't know about up till this point. And then actually we're just going to have Ruthie kind of like not forgive and kill at the end. Like it's not like a twist that kind of recontextualizes everything before it. It just kind of says like, actually, no, no, that thing that we just had this big scene beforehand. It's like literally the very next scene. They like go back on what happened just before it. So it's not really a twist so much as a like, I don't know. It's a very odd way to end the story, no matter what point you're trying to make. And even with the incongruous narration over it, I remember the first time I was like, what? Did Supergirl kill him? And we're just, I had to go back and reread. Oh no, she's like, was writing a story that was like not telling the truth. It was all this stuff just kind of thrown in at the very last few pages. That wasn't like a twist so much as a just like, actually, never mind. We're going to do something totally opposite. So to me, it was more obnoxious than anything.
And I wonder, it seems like part of what's going on is I think King wants us to ask some questions about the sort of idea of the noble lie, because there's this earlier scene in which Ruthie asks Supergirl whether she ever like tried to get any kind of vengeance or anything after the death of Krypton, and she says that she didn't, and sort of asks, I think Ruthie asks sort of if she hates, the people who made it happen. And she says no, she doesn't hate anyone. And from Ruthie's narration from her novel, or not novel, but sort of memoir, I don't know what you call it exactly, lightly fictionalized memoir, it's made clear that Ruthie sort of sees through that and knows that Supergirl does have hatred in her heart, but sort of says that sometimes it's better for people not to know that. And like, the novel has like a very interesting, in the like original kind of Platonic context, is this very interesting idea that's like worth interrogating and quite provocative and valuable and yada yada. But like to me it's like it feels almost sort of worse than just kind of grim, dark, grim and gritty kind of superhero.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's kind of
because
nihilistic, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know if it's exactly nihilistic so much as like it's like does virtue matter, right? Like, or is it okay if we just sort of think someone's virtuous, right? Like,
Mm,
I think it's actually better, if Supergirl is virtuous, and it's also better like if Ruthie does forgive, right? Or even if she, right? So if the best, let's say, if from a kind of broadly kind of Christian perspective, if the best response is sort of forgiveness, right, and kind of washing what sort of saying that like I won't let the kind of cycle of blood, I won't participate in it, right? So if that's the best, right? And the second best is maybe kind of immediate revenge, right? You're sort of so angry and like there's this terribly evil person and you just kill him. And right, ideally in this sort of best sort of forgiveness scenario, there's attempted rehabilitation, right? But there actually is rehabilitation here, right? And it seems really perverse that like below, sort of forgiveness and attempted rehabilitation and below sort of immediate revenge is you actually like put the person in a space to grow
hmm
and then still then when he is sort of clearly genuinely changed and wants forgiveness to murder a decrepit old man like that
Yeah.
seems so much worse, right? and
Yeah.
and,
Right.
and I mean and again like I don't want to just kind of say like, oh, this is what King thinks is the ideal, right? That we should all be like completely willing to forgive and we should sort of put people through torture or something, right? I think to be cliche about it, right? It is a little bit like hurt people, uh, but also like I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't
I
really like
think,
it.
yeah, I don't like it either. And yeah. And I think the point is somewhat unclear. The fact that, and we're not alone in this. I mean, if you look online, like most people are like, hey, what was up with that ending? Like, what did that mean? It's people are, that's the most common reaction to this from people who have read it is like, yeah, I didn't really like the ending or understand it. So it doesn't seem to really land in anyone's mind very clearly. Yeah, I think it just more leaves you kind of feeling kind of, especially because like I said, like I think there is a point, on the beach, right, where Ruthie makes this big speech of to Supergirl of like, hey, look, I thought the universe was meaningless, and I thought it was just all about like, I needed to show Karem that it was meaningless, that I could kill him too. But then you came along and you showed me goodness, and you showed me that there's actually justice and good in the universe. There's actually like an objective good, and because of that, I can't kill him. And so that's a pretty good note to end on, I think. Like, that I like that. And even so, she keeps Supergirl from kind of falling into that same despair that she was feeling. If you wanted to do an epilogue like this, which seems like that's where I thought it was going, was like there's also some ultimate catharsis that could happen at the end for Ruthie by actually forgiving the man who killed her father, did horrible stuff, you know, who had become repentant. So that could be, it could have been showing that like, wow, good really does triumph over evil in the end, even to the point where she can forgive the person that she was hunting down this whole time. Could have been good, or you could have left that epilogue completely out as well and have it be fine. But it just leaves you with just like a bad taste in your mouth. It's not well written. It's not done in a way that it's like not worth the twist or anything, and it's just not. It kind of invalidates a lot of what came before it in a ham-fisted, inelegant way. I mean, to compare it to another space opera, you think about Star Wars, right, where you have the character of Vader, who's really a very horrible character, a horrible person, blows up a planet, shown doing really horrible stuff, tormenting the heroes throughout the story. And yet, I think the original trilogy is a very powerfully satisfying end in that, the character of Luke loves his father, who's a terrible person to the end, to the point to where he redeems him at the end. And somehow
Yeah.
pulls him out of the darkness instead of taking revenge on this character who's like tormented him for the whole series. and it's like you walk away from that, even if you're not young enough to articulate it, but it really resonates, of good triumphing over evil, not through, not through necessarily like beating someone in a lightsaber fight, but through like kind of forgiveness and mercy and love,
Yeah.
And this one is like kind of the opposite, where you're like, yeah, that was kind of, gross.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I guess we should sort of explain, because we aren't super detailed sort of in the summary this time around. We often are more sort of detailed, but we wanted to kind of be a little more big picture and thematic. We should explain sort of like the reason Ruthie writes the book, seemingly, is because it's very clear that if Ruthie kills Krem, then these sort of brigands who are working with him will come and kill her and her family and ravage her planet.
Right.
And so there's this sort of one panel where Supergirl comes to see old lady Ruthie. I like your book. And she says, that fictitious fiddle faddle. I'm sorry you had to waste your time on it. Don't know why I wrote the tome in the first place. I should have told what really happened if I had any guts at all. You think I'm scared of a brigand at my age? Let them come now, and I'll show them a whipping worthy of their cursed ways. Right, so by, in the book, saying, oh, Krem was killed by Supergirl, then the brigands would sort of just be angry with Supergirl, and either they would sort of let her be because she sort of defeated them once before, or they would come after her and Supergirl would deal with them. When in reality, what they've done is sort of put him into the Phantom Zone for 300 years, and it's also sort of painful because I really like the character of Supergirl throughout much of this, and it's I think intentionally ambiguous, but Supergirl comes back as sort of now looking like an adult woman, though it's been a very long time, but she has not aged a ton. She's aged some, Kryptonian and all, and she's sort of smiling and says to him, Krem of the Yellow Hills, you served your time, you worked on your soul, you're home and you are free. And that's all that Supergirl says to him. And then Supergirl sort of lets Ruthie bash Krem in the head, and then Ruthie walks off and Supergirl walks off.
Yeah.
And so like it's sort of disappointing to me that like, right, I would like it more. I don't know. I mean, it sort of bothers me because like if like one character has sort of failed to really internalize the lesson, or right, it's been decades and the pain is still there and they haven't been able to forgive and let go, and still kills the person who wronged them. Like, it's depressing, but it's still it's sort of realistic, right? There are many people who do hold on to grudges in this way, but it's sort of disappointing because you have throughout the first, until the last few pages, you have these, Ruthie is sort of is growing because of Supergirl, and Supergirl is kind of confronting her, lack of a better term, trauma, and in a way being made worse by it, which right can happen. There's ways of sort of confronting one's trauma that actually sort of makes you a worse person. Like, okay, that could be realistic, right? And then Ruthie at the end of the journey kind of communicates to her like, no, like you have taught me, right? And seemingly Supergirl got sort of pulled back from the edge. But then, a very long period of time on, because I assume time is different in the Phantom Zone, so it's probably been like 7 decades or whatever in the normal universe. 6-7 decades on, Ruthie still wants to, or has decided that she wants to kill him, and Supergirl is just sort of.
We don't really see a reaction from her, but just kind of walks off.
Yeah, but her reaction is not. She's not physically right. It would be one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is also
or something. Yeah.
She has super speed. She could tell beforehand what Ruthie was about to do. Right. She could easily have stopped. So she lets her do it, and Supergirl, you can sort of from her posture is fine. Right. She's not like even trying to kind of do a kind of token opposition, and then she sort of stands there and walks off, right? And in all three of those images, her posture is such that she's clearly basically at ease.
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's just sort of, I don't know, disappointing to get to the end, and there's been these real sort of throughout these glimmers of hope and of healing after profound loss and pain. Right, and that's why I say, like, it bothers me more than something that's sort of more, I don't know, straightforwardly like vengeance oriented, like
Right. Right.
certain Punisher comics or something. It bothers me more because there are these kind of moments. There are so, I mean, more than moments. There, like, a lot of the story there is confronting evil and doing what small good you can.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this sort of sense of the value of forgiveness, clemency, mercy. And so for it to end like this, it makes it leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably, I don't have much more to add onto it, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think
think
that's
it did. And I've said this before that I think the last page for me kind of made me hate what came before. Even, like it just was like, okay, it's like watching a movie that's kind of intriguing up until the point where the big twist is it was all a dream or something like that. You're like, oh, come on. Just there are ways that, like, this did not stick the landing, I guess you could say. And it did so in such a way that I was like, I just, going on this journey was certainly not worth the destination for me. Yeah.
yeah, and it feels frankly a bit. I mean, again, I've only read it once. I finished reading it now about an hour and a half ago. Maybe I'm really sort of missing something that would contextualize it and make it seem much more valuable. But at least from where I'm sitting, it feels very sophomoric and edgelordy.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Edgelord's great. That's why I was, yeah.
It's sort of, you know
Yeah.
it's because there are works that kind of play with a person's emotions or expectations, and I really like them and they really work. I don't know, right? Like, minor spoilers for 500 Days of Summer, but like that movie like plays with a lot of kind of romantic comedy tropes, but ultimately a lot of it is sort of like kind of both of them are sort of immature and like harmful to each other, but also kind of grow because of it. Well, yeah, they both sort of seemingly grow because of it.
Can I
And
give a quick example?
you don't get to have the kind of simple happy ending of
Yeah.
these two characters you've been following end up together, right? But you actually do get this fairly mature kind of examination of the ways that kind of failings in our relationships, if we allow them, can actually help us to become better people and sort of love better. Like, that really works for me. But this, right, feels like it's sort of giving a lot of the kind of pieces of being able to show this story of the young woman intent on revenge and violence coming to recognize the futility of it,
Yeah.
and sort of being shown by this kind of paragon of, if not paragon of virtue, at least someone who really wants to be good and
Yeah.
wants to show forgiveness.
Yeah.
But it ultimately feels, I don't know, like it's sort of like, ha ha, no,
Well,
just kill him anyway, right? It feels like you're
yeah.
sort of, it's like the teenager trying to like
Yes. When I
childishly scandalize their parents, and it's like your parents know that, I don't know, drugs or sex or whatever exist. Like, it's not that, like, I know that people often fail to forgive, right? I mean, that's actually the more common
right.
thing, right? The more common thing is to seek out revenge. Like, it's not that, sort of shocking to me that it happens to someone. It's just sort of frustrating in this story that it kind of seems to give the indications of like hope and growth, but ultimately it's like, okay, so is all that illusory? Like, we can't,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you said sophomoric and edgelord, it brought up a memory to me of something that's when I was probably a sophomore in high school. There was a, I remember there was a creative writing class that someone wrote the story. where it was this boy who was crippled. And sorry about this anecdote, but it's always stuck with me. This boy was crippled, right? And he just wanted to walk. And so, he finally for Christmas, he wrote Santa Claus, please, I want the use of my legs. And like Santa Claus appears on Christmas and he's like this drunk, kind of weird old man. And he says, yeah, kid, I'll give you the use of your legs. And then he wakes up the next morning and he can walk, but everyone else in the world is crippled. And I remember at the time I was like, wow, I could never write something like that. That seems really profound or something like that. And then quickly upon reflection, I mean, that's like the perfect like mindset of like the sophomoric, like edgy thing. Like, what are you trying to say with that? What is the point of that? Like, this actually does not make a significant point. It's just kind of a goofy thing that you would do when you're trying to be edgy and kind of dark, and to me, like that's always stuck with me is like, be honest with the point you're trying to make. If you're trying to say something, say it with sincerity and conviction, like don't try to be clever. And to me, that's just what this like totally had the smacked up is like someone trying to be clever and tricky with their writing. And it just felt like, okay, whatever, that was the point you were trying to make, okay. Like, it bugged me. It was annoying.
There's a line in my favorite movie, Calvary, which is a very like dark, intense, but as I watch it,
great movie. Yeah.
But there's this line, right, where there's this one like old writer who and the priest who's the protagonist comes out and sort of has brought him some things on the little island where the writer lives. And the writer's like working on a typewriter and the priest says, isn't the typewriter a bit of an affectation? And the writer says, at my age, Father, everything is an affectation. And the priest says, that's one of those lines that sounds deep, but really doesn't mean anything. Right. And I feel a little bit that way, sort of about this work that's trying and failing to be profound, at least to me.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe that's a good place I mean, I would say if, obviously this does not really get my recommendation. Generally we review stuff. I think this is maybe one of the first things we reviewed that we're both pretty sour on it, but
yeah,
I would say just as far as a content warning goes, there is definitely some kind of quite a bit of like, some unpleasant violence and not even just like, it's not like action kind of stuff, but like some fairly ugly stuff in here too.
Yeah, so it's also sort of thematically disturbing, mm-hmm. for a younger person. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely not appropriate for younger readers, I would say. So don't pick this up. It's not something I would buy for younger readers either. It's much more of an adult kind of theme to it. So yeah, it does not get that. So just parental warning.
Yeah.
Don't pick this up for your kids. All right. Next week, we will be reading Hellboy, The Wolves of St. August, and The Chained Coffin. I think we'll stick to the plan this time around.
Yeah, I think, I'm looking forward to it. If you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do for the podcast to support it. The first is just to keep listening and tell your friends about it.
Second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars whenever you listen to us.
And the last thing you can do is consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on upcoming episode topics, and even an original drawing from Levi. But most of all, you can help make the podcast sustainable.
That's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.